Over the last 4 years, I've personally hired and trained over 200 virtual assistants for my company and helped hundreds of other founders delegate their way out of the weeds by placing virtual assistants into their business. And in that time, I've seen every mistake you can possibly make when hiring a VA. Hiring the right VA can genuinely give you back 20 to 40 hours per week, which is time that you can spend on high leverage work that actually grows your business. But most founders mess this up by not following the right process. So in this video, I'm breaking down the exact step-by-step system we use at Coconut to help founders hire world-class virtual assistants in 2026, including what to look for, where to find them, how to vet them properly, and how to set them up for success from day one. Let's dive in. Now, first, you need to figure out what you actually need to delegate. The biggest mistake that founders make is hiring a VA before they know what to delegate. So here's the framework that we use with every single one of our clients. Open your project management software or whatever task list you have and review everything that you did the previous week. Maybe review your calendar. Use the Eisenhower matrix to categorize tasks. So first, you've got important plus urgent. That means that you should do it. Important plus not urgent, that means you should schedule it. If it is not important, but it is urgent, you should delegate that. That is what we are after. And lastly, there's not important and not urgent. You should probably just delete that task or kick it down the road. Example of tasks in the delegate quadrant: managing your inbox and responding to emails, of course, that's the basic answer. Scheduling meeting and keeping your calendar organized, another very basic, what you would think of when hiring a VA or executive assistant. Now, there's other ones as well: posting and distributing your social media content, updating your CRM, handling data entry, responding to basic customer support questions, and the last one would be booking travel and putting together itineraries. So event management is actually a big one. We've done several Michelin-star dinners, mansion parties, where we are having founders get together, and our executive assistants are really putting together everything. They find the venue, they secure the venue, they figure out the guest list, they reach out to guests, they confirm with guests, they help us basically put together A to Z everything for these events, and then we just show up. It's fantastic. Now, I recommend starting by identifying just 5 to 10 hours per week of work that you can delegate. Don't try to delegate everything at once. Focus on repetitive tasks with clear processes. So you need to first create your standard operating procedures, SOPs. Before you hire anyone, you need to document how you do these tasks. So here is the Loom plus ChatGPT method that we teach all of our clients. Step 1, complete these tasks while you narrate every step on Loom. Maybe you're sending out an invoice or you're prepping an invoice. Then you would go on to this Loom recording and say, when I send an invoice, I first check this form to see what they ordered. Then I multiply that by X. Now I can prep this invoice. I find the client's name here, I plug that in, and then I send it out. Step 2, after you've done all of that Loom recording, you download that Loom transcript. Step 3, you feed it to ChatGPT with this prompt. Adapt this into an SOP I can give to someone on my team. Now, step 4, you now have a written and a visual walkthrough of this task that you just completed, and now you can delegate that to somebody effectively. So why does that matter? Now your VA can refer back to both the document and the video. So if they want to see the very basic step-by-step, they go to the document. If they want to get the nuance and the commentary, they can watch the video. So that cuts down a lot on these back and forth questions, and it makes training 10 times faster because you are basically just doing a task for the final time. You're putting commentary on it. You're putting that through ChatGPT to make some kind of SOP, step-by-step process. And then you hand all of that to a VA that can do all of it the next time. Really, how long does that take? I mean, it takes 10 to 15 minutes to record and document each process, depending on how long the task actually is. So in just 2 to 3 hours, you can have SOPs on a lot of tasks that are your core basic tasks that you can now delegate. Now, you need to understand where to source top talent. So not all offshore markets are created equal. Now, we source 95% of our talent from the Philippines, and we have some great reasons why we do this, but there are plenty of roles that we do not hire from the Philippines that we actually hire elsewhere. So here's why we do hire from the Philippines. Number 1, English proficiency. There are near native speakers for, $10 to $24 per hour. If you compare that to a high school worker in the US, $15, $16 an hour without benefits. There are much lower fraud rates compared to other markets. In the Philippines, you very rarely hear about somebody scamming or spamming you from the Philippines. Now, another one that I really enjoy is cultural alignment. They understand American culture, American business culture. They get your humor. They often are watching the same Netflix shows, which is really fun and makes for a even more fun work environment, especially when it's this remote type setup. Now, the last one that I would mention is the work ethic. Filipino VAs have amazing work ethics, amazing attitudes. A lot of our VAs are very proactive as well. They figure out how to use new tools. They figure out how to do new processes. I'd say 75% of our VAs now use AI tools daily. So here's some red flags to watch for in other markets, but also even when you're hiring a Filipino VA. If you notice that they have an extremely low rate, it's probably too good to be true. You are basically getting what you pay for to some degree. Now, if there's poor communication during the whole vetting application process, especially the interview process, that is obviously a big red flag. If they have a really big lack of experience or some kind of verifiable work history, that's a big red flag. If they have no video interview capability, or if they don't want to send an intro video, that can be a red flag. Is not always a red flag. I've actually hired a few VAs that just don't want to be on video, and it's totally fine. For the role that I was hiring for, that really worked out well, and they turned out to be amazing VAs. So that's not always a bad thing, but it can be a red flag. Now, before I continue, if you want us to help you find the perfect VA that can save you 20 to 40 hours per week, click the link in the description and book a free call with us. We'll also give you a free trial period, so you can literally vet, interview, hire a VA, work with them for free for a week, and then decide if you want to work with us. So it is a very low risk process. Feel free to click that link in the description. All right, now going to the vetting process. This is where most founders fail. They just don't vet thoroughly enough. We have a 6-step vetting process at Coconut. First, we'll do an experience evaluation. We review their actual work samples, not just their resume. We look for relevant experience with the industry or with these specific tools. Ask, have you done this specific role before? Have you used these specific tools? Personality assessment is huge. Test if they're a good cultural fit for your company. It doesn't always work well with American companies. It just depends on your work culture. Now, you should definitely look for traits like proactivity, communication style, work ethic. There is one red flag if you find somebody that really is always waiting for instructions versus someone who is really anticipating needs and being very proactive. That can be a very big red flag or green flag depending on what you're noticing. English proficiency test. Now, don't just assume, actually test their written communication. There's also tests out there where you can test the verbal communication, but you can also see that very quickly on an intro video. Look for clarity, grammar, professional tone. Depending on what you need in the role, it really depends on what you test for. The video introduction requirement, they should be able to communicate clearly on the camera. Again, it depends on the role, but typically I find this a really good exercise, and it helps us screen out a lot of candidates. This is really, I'd say, non-negotiable for client-heavy roles. If you want somebody that's going to be communicating with clients, it's a really good sign if they can also handle themselves well on a Zoom call, on an interview, whatever it might be. So you want to watch out for, can they articulate their thoughts? Do they seem confident? Do they seem proactive? A lot of those first impressions that you get are likely very accurate. Now, initial interview. So you want to do some kind of an initial interview with these VAs, with your candidates. Again, the intro video is great, but actually getting to talk with them live is a really big differentiator. Do they handle themselves well on the call? And you want to come up with questions to see, how would a candidate prioritize, handle multiple urgent tasks? Do they reach out to you? Do they just try to go for it? Do they do research first? What is their answer there? How do they handle mistakes and feedback? Are they open to constructive criticism? How do they like to receive that feedback? Say Philippine people are a little bit different in how they want to receive feedback. How do they want to receive praise? So make sure to ask about that. Now, you can also ask about their level of initiative or proactivity. You can also ask about their communication preferences in general, and find examples of where they've gone above and beyond. Even in answering your questions, where have they gone above and beyond in answering your question and saying, hey, this is maybe an experience that illustrates this point, right? Finding those green flags versus red flags in an interview can be incredibly helpful. Now, one thing that I've found very valuable is just loosening up on the interview a little bit and trying to avoid the very typical interview questions. I'd say from what I've seen in the Philippines, the people there are very much prepped to answer the very basic, very typical interview questions. But if you throw in some curveballs, if you throw in just random funny type questions, they loosen up. You can see them visibly loosen up very quickly. And then I feel like you really get to the core of who they are as a person, instead of just this this kind of wall of, corporate talk and corporate speak where it's very typical interview questions, interview answers. So try to mix it up a little bit. And again, I would recommend doing some kind of hiring tasks. So give them like a 30-minute, 1-hour task. Make sure to pay them for their time, something that would be very typical of what they do in the role for you, and then see how well they do at that, how much do they go above and beyond. And again, just make sure to pay them for their time so they're not doing a ton of free hiring tasks. Now, one green flag to look for in this hiring task is, are they constantly communicating, updating you? You don't want them to be, badgering you or asking you a ton of questions or, feeling like they're just stuck all the time. They should be very proactive in doing their own research and trying to bridge any gaps by themselves. But it's very helpful when they are proactively communicating with you and just saying, hey, almost done, I'm halfway done, I'll be done by this day. Things like that, just giving you a good timeline. Now, the trial period. I would say never hire somebody full-time without some kind of trial period. Here's the 40-hour trial approach that we use. You want to give them real work in a week. So give them a week, give them a full-time hour or part-time for 2 weeks maybe, but 40 hours of work is a really great time period to really see a lot of the great indicative first impressions. So you want to see if this person is going above and beyond, if they're doing well in these job roles, job functions. That would be very typical of the job. And provide your SOPs and Loom videos up front so that they can be prepped and just ready to go, hit the ground running. And make sure to check in throughout the trial period. So at the 10-hour mark, 20-hour mark, 30-hour mark, and you want to be evaluating several different things during the trial. So speed, how quickly do they complete tasks once they understand the task? Quality, does their work meet your standards, of course? Communication, are they being proactive about updates and questions? Autonomy, do they need constant handholding or can they figure these things out by themselves? And cultural fit, do they mesh well with your working style? Some red flags during the trial, if they are just radio silent for hours or days on end, they've completed work with just obvious errors that they should have caught but didn't, if they are constantly needing clarification on processes, especially if you've already documented them well in the SOPs. Defensive reactions to feedback is another one. Some green flags to look out for during this trial period is if they finish tasks faster than expected, if they ask smart questions that show that they're thinking ahead, if they find any ways to improve your process, they communicate proactively without being asked. Those are all great green flags to look out for. Now, how can you set them up for success in those first 90 days? Hiring is really just the beginning. Onboarding is where success happens. So our onboarding approach is basically to make sure that in that first week, they understand very quickly what is expected of them. They start to have their first really practice rounds with each of these tasks, with each of these responsibilities. In the first 30 days, we really expect them to be very familiar with the company, very familiar with the processes, maybe asking questions, still trying to get clarification, trying to really just nail everything down. In month 1, we do try to check on them several times a week. We still do, I'd say, weekly one-on-ones, like in a video call, but checking in as often as possible on Slack just to make sure everything is going well. They may have already reached out to you and that's totally fine. Month 2, I'd say, just every other week, just 2 video check-ins. And then month 3, you don't need to do as many video check-ins if you don't need it. But again, still at least weekly check-ins via Slack, email, whatever it is very wise. And that doesn't mean that that's the only time you're hearing from them, but I'd say that's when I would recommend you as the founder, as the client, actually reaching out to them proactively and saying, hey, what are you struggling with? What's going well? Things like that to really do some discovery and make sure that they are feeling good about the role. And even before all of that, I would recommend just sitting down with them honestly and having a very frank chat of, hey, I want you to take this role and run with it. I want you to be autonomous. I want you to be independent. So ask as many questions as you want. Try to do your own research, of course, but by month 2, by month 3, I really want you to be independent with this. I want you to tell me, where we could improve, to push back on me, to push back on the process. Say, hey, I think this would be an even better way to do it. And just even saying that several times in those first few meetings, those first few check-ins, makes a world of difference for the rest of the engagement with that VA. And really the goal being in 2 to 3 months, they should not need you for most decisions. And it's really more of like, hey, here's this problem and I came up with a solution. Here's a couple solutions I've thought of. I think this is the great way to go. What do you think? That is really the ideal way a VA should operate instead of saying, hey, I ran into this problem, what do I do? And of course, like anything, if they do come to you with a problem, just turn it back on them a little bit. Say, well, what do you think we should do? And that really teaches them, hey, think about these problems and present solutions instead of just presenting problems. And you should always empower, encourage these VAs to make those decisions on their own. It really does make a world of difference if they hear you say, hey, you have my trust to make the call on this. Like, you are autonomous in this role. Like, what do you want to do? Just encouraging them and giving them reassurance is very helpful. Okay, now common mistakes to avoid: micromanaging. Do not track their screen. Do not nitpick hours worked. I would always recommend just doing end of day reports. So, hey, at the end of the day, write up what you completed this day, or even end of week reports. Write out what you completed this week and the rough hours worked. Like, if they're full-time, 40 hours this week, okay, here's everything I accomplished day by day. That is fantastic. And I think that really leads to a lot more independence and autonomy, which means that you should be focusing on outcomes and project completion, just not time tracking or screen tracking. And to do that, set metric goals, set reasonable goals and activities, deadlines that they need to be doing by certain timeframes. Another common mistake to avoid is public criticism. Always give feedback, constructive criticism privately whenever you can. Lack of communication is another common mistake to avoid. You need to be reaching out. A remote relationship, a remote work scenario like this, you really need to be proactive in reaching out, making sure that you feel connected. And I would always recommend having meetings, having check-ins where you just talk about personal life. You don't have to dive too deep into anything, but it's kind of like that water cooler talk, right? Just the small talk, just making them feel like they are part of the team and making you guys feel like you are connected. That will so much help the work relationship and what is actually output in the work side. Another common mistake to avoid is no growth path. You need to be able to show them how they can advance, how they can improve, future promotions if possible. You need to show them where this role can take them and make sure that it lines up with their goals as well. The last common mistake to avoid is a lack of respect. So remember, these are professionals. These are the best of the Philippines. They're not just cheap labor that you can, outsource offshore. That is not the vibe we are going for. These are human beings that are excellent at what they do, and you want to be paying them for what they are worth. All right, so when do you scale? Here are some signs that I would say that show you are ready to hire a VA, or even the second VA. If your first VA is consistently hitting capacity, they're being proactive, they're taking on a lot, but they just have so much on their plate that it's just piling up at that point. If you have additional, work that can be delegated, if that is piling up, you might need a second VA. If you have just mastered the art of delegation and you have hardly anything to do, but now your VA is just so busy, you should get that second VA to take some of their bandwidth off their plate. If your business has grown, especially if you can support that additional headcount and you just have so many fires going that you need help in other areas, that VA number 2 can be very helpful. Now, one thing that I've done is actually I've hired an executive assistant, but they take things off of my plate in one specific area. So like HR, for example, if they start to take more and more in that and they really just crush it in that role, then maybe it's time for them to move into an HR role. You can ask them, hey, do you want to move from my EA into this role? And I've had that happen, I think 2 or 3 times now. And it's been very effective. And we are always grateful that they have moved into this new role. And then I hire another executive assistant, train them up. We delegate so many tasks to them that they now have a permanent, vital role in the company. And so with that, I would recommend hiring an executive assistant with some kind of emphasis. Like, hey, you are going to be my executive assistant. You'll do all of these baseline tasks, but you will also help with marketing or with social media or with admin or customer success, for example. I find that to be very helpful. And then again, if they do so well in that role, then they can even create a part-time, full-time role in that emphasis. All right, now I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This does take work. Documenting processes, running interviews, managing trial periods. It's not nothing, right? It is a process. Sometimes you have to do a little bit more at upfront cost before you can really enjoy the benefits of delegating work. So if you are a founder who's tired of being stuck in the weeds of admin work, I would love to offer you something. We will give you 40 hours of free work with the best of the best, with a top tier virtual assistant. We source the talent, we vet them through our full process, we help you interview your top candidates, and then you get to work with your top pick VA for 40 hours of work. That can be split over 2 weeks period of time. And if it doesn't work out, if you find that you really just can't delegate things to an executive assistant, or if you're not happy with the one that we found you, we can always replace that one, or we can part ways at that point. You know, there's no risk, there's no long-term commitment. If it is a great fit, if you love this EA, if you love delegating after those 40 hours, then it's just a month-to-month subscription with Coconut VA. And if not, you walk away having delegated 40 hours of work at zero cost. If that sounds too good to be true, you know, click the first link in the description to book a free call with us. We'll talk you through, you know, what you need to delegate, what kind of VA would be the best fit for you, and map out exactly how we can help you buy back those 20 to 40 hours per week that you need out of your life. So again, click that first link below and book a call. And if you want to see how I run my $3 million a year business with just virtual assistants, then watch this video next. It's been great. Hope to see you next time.